Okay, I think we'll get started. So welcome to our first Friday Flash Talk of February, entitled "Were There Really Women in the Valley of the Kings?" Our presenter today is Dr. Kathleen Sheppard of Missouri S&T, and this presentation coincides with her new book, as you can see on the screen there, The Untold Story of Women Egyptologists in the Gilded Age. We're really excited about this presentation today. I just want to thank you, Dr. Sheppard, for being here with us, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for coming today and spending part of your lunchtime with me. I wanted to talk about sort of this, question of were there really women in the Valley of the Kings? Because here's an untold story about this book. When we were doing the cover, I was talking to my editor. First of all, this was the only cover that they sent to me. I absolutely fell in love with it. And I said, one thing that might get people, though, is that the women on the cover, we've got Mary Jonas on the left, Myrtle Broom in the middle, and Amos Calverley on the right. They're at Abydos. So is that going to cause a problem, do you think? And he said, nobody is going to know. And he's mostly right, but I have gotten a couple emails from Egyptologists going, does it bother you that they are not actually in the Valley of the Kings? And maybe that sort of shows that there weren't really women in the Valley of the Kings. And I said, first of all, no, that doesn't bother me. And secondly, there were really women who were working in the Valley of the Kings, despite the fact that we don't really have very many photographs of them working in the Valley of the Kings. And that's, of course, not the only evidence that we have for any work that's done by women. But I love telling this story because it really is important to understand that in Egyptology, women were working everywhere. So I love to share that story. So yes, there were really women working in the Valley of the Kings, kind of from the get-go. And the one person I'm going to talk about today is named Emma Andrews. She's in the book. She gets an entire chapter to herself, well, herself and her partner, Theodore Davis. But I want to talk a little bit about who she was and why she was so important. So, first of all, she was a very wealthy American. She earned her money basically through, she inherited some from her father, and then she inherited some from her husband after he died. And she was traveling in Egypt from 1889 to 1915. She was traveling with her partner, Theodore Davis. They had started going to Egypt and traveling up the Nile in 1889. And that's when she started keeping her diary, which is really important in terms of information that we can glean about all of the activities that they did. She excavated in Egypt from 1900 to 1915. And while she may not have been the first to enter any tombs, she may not have handled a bunch of rock and stone that was coming up out of the ground, but she, I think, should still be considered an excavator. She was a patron to archaeologists like Howard Carter, Percy Newberry, Edward Ayrton, James Quibell, so a number of archaeologists who maybe you've heard of, right? These are pretty famous guys in Egyptology, and she provided a lot of the money that kept their careers going. She was the only person to keep any kind of continuing record of the excavation or clearing of over 20 tombs in the Valley of the Kings from 1900 to 1915. So thanks to her, we have the record of people who visited these tombs in the order in which the tombs were found, because those can sometimes get a little bit out of order. What came out of those tombs, who went into those tombs, what was the state of the tomb when it was first found versus what was the state of the tomb when they finally left it. So because of her, we have a record of most of the work that she did with Theodore Davis. Now, Theodore Davis was also very wealthy. And while he was a patron of archaeology, he wasn't like Flinders Petrie. He didn't really think that he needed to publish a whole lot because he didn't need anyone to provide him any money. So when he published stuff, it was mainly because Howard Carter told him to, or Maspero told him to. So We don't have a ton of, we don't have the amount of publications from Davis that we probably should for the amount of work that he did. So because Emma Andrews was so well known, we probably have a lot of photographs of her, right? Like she was super wealthy. She was around during the time of photography. So we obviously should have a lot of photographs of her. We actually don't. But here is a photograph of a woman. Her name is Constance Weigel. She is the wife of Arthur Weigel. Here she is on the left. They're in front of Kings Valley Tomb number 2, which is the tomb of Ramses IV. This was taken on January 7th, 1907, as you can see up in the corner. We've got Theodore Davis in the middle. He's the one holding his hat. He's the only one without a hat, which is very on brand for him in his jodhpurs. But this is the most reproduced photograph of Theodore Davis and this group, and Emma Andrews isn't in it. We know this because she was in the market that day. She wrote in her diary, January 7th, 1907, everybody else went over to the valley, but I needed to do a little shopping. And then she did some visiting, and I believe she had tea with Howard Carter that day. So she's not in this photograph. Another photograph from the Valley of the Kings. This one is from 1902. And the one woman in the photograph, here's Theodore Davis again. Here are some of their workers, which hardly ever get in the photograph. So I'm so excited to see them. This is Nettie Buttles. This is Emma's niece, Nettie Buttles, and she is holding a mask that they have pulled out of a tomb. Later on, that mask would lose its eyebrows and its chin beard, and it just sort of disintegrated. But we have a photograph of it when it was in one piece. But that's not Emma Andrews. So where is she? Some people think one of these women is Emma Andrews, but this photograph was taken sometime between 1900 and 1907. So one of these women is supposed to be between the ages of about 63 and 70. This is Howard Carter on the right-hand side, just in case you were wondering. And I always sort of make the joke, I don't know what kind of moisturizer Emma Andrews would have had access to as a wealthy woman in 1900, but neither one of those women looks between the ages of 63 and 70 to me. So neither one of those women is Emma Andrews either. In fact, the only information that we know of about Emma Andrews is this description of her from her passport application in 1887. She was 5 feet 1 inches tall. She had a high forehead and brown eyes. She had an aquiline nose. She had a medium mouth and chin. Her hair was brown. She had a fair complexion and an oval face. That honestly could describe probably either of the women in these photographs, any of the women in these photographs, but none of them are Emma Andrews. I have a theory as to why we have no extant photographs of her, which I could talk about at another time, but this is all we know about her as a person. So we have a problem there. She was really important to Egyptology, but we don't have any photographs of her. And that, I think, says a lot about the kind of work that she also did in the Valley of the Kings. So how do we even find out any of the work that any of these women did, especially Emma Andrews? We go to the archives. It sounds really glamorous to sort of go in and to request, documents. And if any of you have ever worked in archives, if you're working in them now, you know that it can be a slog, right? You can find a lot of really exciting stuff, but it's not as glamorous maybe as it sounds. This image here is an image of a postcard that was in the British Museum archives. And this is Margaret Murray's a postcard that Margaret Murray wrote to Budge at the British Museum. And I always pull out her handwriting because it's the easiest to read. It looks like it was written on a typewriter. This is an image of working in the collections at the Egypt Exploration Society. They have a ton of stuff, and it is a beautiful, lovely, wonderful room there in Doughty Mews. And of course, the best archivists and people at the EES. This is an image of what some of the archival stuff looks like at the Garstang Museum in Liverpool. You can't really read a whole lot in there, but once you open the box, the records are very well organized. This is the Griffith Institute, photographs of Egyptologists. Of course, I dove right in here, hoping to find anything about Emma Andrews, but there was nothing. These are the amazingly well-kept and well-organized archives at the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures at the University of Chicago. And here is a room that they'll put you in to access those as well. So you got to go in, you have to sort through all of the information that's in there. A lot of people sort of say the dust of the archives. I have never been in a dusty archive. They're all very well kept. And the records are extremely important. Here is where we find the women. If we look for them doing the digging, the actual physical digging in the ground in the early 20th century, we won't find them. In fact, if we want to find European or American male archaeologists doing the same thing, we won't really find them doing a lot of the digging. It's actually going to be the Egyptians. But you'll still get men in their pictures. They're very dirty. They're in the valley. They're doing very important sort of excavation work. Here is, these are two images of the Valley of the Kings. This is El Kern, which is the main mountain that's there. This image here on the right was taken in 1882. And so you can see how a lot of the topography is very much the same. I love sort of doing a back and forth comparison of the top of this mountain. But the topography on the ground has changed a lot because since 1882, we've found dozens of tombs that are buried within the mountain. So what are women doing in the Valley of the Kings? Here are two modern Egyptologists. Here's Anne Austin over here and Julia Trochet. They're both Missouri Egyptologists, just like myself. And so we went walking about the Valley of the Kings and wanted to know what it was like, right, to be there as a woman, say 120 years ago. So it's important, I think, not just to do archives, but also to go be on site. Emma Andrews was on site again for about 20, the uncovering of over 20 tombs, or the clearing of 20 tombs in the Valley of the Kings. And two I'm going to talk about here really quickly are Kings Valley 46. And this was the tomb of Yuya and Tuya, who are displayed right here. This is before the Grand Egyptian Museum was open. So this is still in the Trevere Museum. And you can see behind them the golden chariot that was found there. So as we're talking about KV 46, Theodore Davis had sort of gone down in there, and they were hoping for a tomb that had not been opened since antiquity. And when Gaston Maspero went in with him, he said, yes, this has not been disturbed since antiquity. And one of the big things that we find in here is this chariot that is all in one piece. And Maspero told Theodore Davis and Emma Andrews, this is only the second intact chariot we have found in a tomb. And Maspero said, this is one of the best and probably the last undisturbed tombs we are going to find in the valley. Emma went in on the day sort of that they opened the door. She had to go down this very, very steep, as you can see, staircase, and she went through. She brought her candle in, and she saw everywhere. She said that she turned her candle, she saw glimpses of gold. And that's because everything was covered in gold. If you went into the tomb, you would be walking on gold flaking on the ground, because as you can see, just everything was covered in some sort of gold leaf, or it was golden. Why don't we hear so much about Yuya and Tuya's golden tomb anymore? It's because in 1922, we found the last virtually undisturbed tomb since antiquity, and that was King Tutankhamun's tomb. But they thought this would be the last one. It was huge news, huge news. But again, Theo didn't write anything down. It was Andrews who wrote down everything, every step of everyone going into the tomb, every step of everyone coming out of the tomb, what they found. She wrote the catalog of everything coming out of the tomb. She drew a map of the tomb that later on Joseph Lyndon Smith used in his work. And then you can find a mock-up of that map in The Complete Valley of the Kings by Nicholas Reeves. All of this comes from Emma Andrews, that we know anything about it. Later on that day, they decided it was time for lunch. And so here's me. They walked up this very steep, there were no stairs there yet, this very steep incline to get up here to this flat area near KV 43, which had been excavated a couple of seasons before. And they went up there because in the heat of the day, this still had shade and they needed to eat lunch. And they could look down into the sun of the valley and they could see where their excavators were still working. They could see that no one was going in who wasn't supposed to be. KV 46 is right down in here. But Theo ate too fast, wanted to get back into the tomb. He ended up fainting going into the tomb. And, Emma was sort of like, how come he gets to go in and faint and he's sort of this big hero? And, I'm not really allowed to go in there until the air is just right. So there was a little bit of commentary there. So that's what they did with KV 46. And then another, just really quickly, was KV 55, which Theodore Davis went in and pronounced that this was the tomb of Queen T, and there was no mistake about that in 1907. So this image here is from Theodore Davis's publication on KV 55. We now know that this was not Queen T, but we're not really sure who it was. Some people think it was Akhenaten who was buried in this tomb, and some people argue it could have been Neferneferuaten or Smenkhare. There are a lot of arguments about this. If you want to get Egyptologists into an argument, ask them who they think was buried in KV 55, and then just stand back, grab your popcorn, and get ready. Here is what 55 looks like today. It's blocked off. It's not really open to the public. But if you get some special permission, you can go inside. So I'm going to show you some pictures of inside here in just a minute. But what they had to do to get into the tomb is they had to be very careful and crawl all over the detritus that had come into the corridor because of rain that would sweep through the valley and sort of destroy the insides of tombs. So they had to put a board here, as you can see, that they could crawl over, and they only had 6 inches to a foot of space here between themselves and the ceiling. And once they crawled down the corridor, they could get into the tomb, which just was a mess. But they took this picture really quick and then went over and through. This is a picture of the corridor now, which is clear. And it's about, I thought I had a photo of Anne walking through it. Yeah, so you can see it's about 10 feet tall, right? That height of the corridor. And that's how full the corridor was. And they went into it, and Emma Andrews drew this map. It is the only map that anyone ever drew of the tomb as you walked in. And here it's labeled. This is from her diary that's both at the American Philosophical Society and at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They were typed up and the handwritten versions were lost. But here you've got rubbish. You have some doors or panels. And so she got that first one that you saw in the photograph, and then there were more. Here is the sarcophagus, and then the mummy of who she's calling Queen T here. And then there was a niche with some canopic jars in it and some panels over here on the wall. But this is the only map that we have of what the tomb looked like when people walked in for the first time, before everything just crumbled in the air of, the 20th century. There was a bunch of gold that would fall off, gold flakes that were falling off. People were walking out with gold flaking in their hair. They lost a lot of information. So here's the niche in the wall here that was full of canopic jars. And then here is the niche today. I mean, obviously it's fully cleared out. But you can see how large it is, right? So these canopic jars, they're really big in that niche there. So Emma Andrews did a ton of work for archaeology, and we just don't know that much about her because Davis never gave her any credit in any of his publications, whatever he did publicize for his work. People do now, right? Because they're using her diary as a source when they're writing about these tombs again. But it didn't start out that way. So we want to know more, right, about what these women were doing in the Valley of the Kings. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sheppard. I really appreciate your presentation today. I want to open it up now to our audience for questions. If anyone has a question for Dr. Sheppard, please feel free to put it in the chat or to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Arthur's here. I see Arthur's, hi, Arthur. Yeah, so the skeleton of KB55 was of a man no older than his early 20s, so cannot be Akhenaten. This is really interesting too, and I know that. And Grafton Elliott Smith said that, right? And then Davis said, you cannot be correct in that. Do not include that information anywhere. So Davis was like, absolutely not. You've got to be wrong. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. You're absolutely right. And then William put one in here. Did Andrews have any formal training in archaeology or art history? She did not. But neither did, I mean, she was basically, I argue in the book that if she had been a man, she would be a famous archaeologist because she was coming into the field with the same exact credentials as any man was at the time. And that was be rich and give money to archaeologists, basically, and they'll let you join the excavation. So she didn't, but she was a patron of a bunch of Egyptologists. And then she also gave a ton of money to schools in Luxor and also to museums. So she funded a ton of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So she should be a lot more famous. It's just she was a woman. Thank you for that question. Anne, I see your hand up. Oh, sorry.
Yes, I had the great pleasure of reading both of your books this week, and I just can't recommend them highly enough. In Women in the Valley of the Kings, you do go into all the different pursuits that these women had that were not necessarily from curating to, so work outside of Egypt as well as within Egypt, epigraphy, and correspondence. It's just, very wide ranging. And I think the human interest stories in the books are really, tremendously interesting. Tea on the Terrace, your other book is such a great companion piece that you get a whole feeling of what's going on during this period more directly with the archaeology and the networks that form. That it is a wonderful read as well.
I did not pay Anne to say this, everybody. She is saying it with no prompting whatsoever.
Oh,
thank you so much.
I'm a
that
former
is so kind.
So I have to push books when I like them.
Thank you. That's very kind.
I think one thing that truly horrified me, which did not involve a woman, was your description of Flinders, the very parsimonious Flinders Petrie, and how he fed his crew, which was shocking beyond belief. And I think one other thing that I want to mention is Margaret Murray, who you cover extensively, and it is a very serious practitioner, hosts a unwrapping party for a mummy, and the controversy of respect for the human versus the scientific output that you gain by it. But it also sounded as if it was going to be one of the last times that this happened. And one thing that was a little horrifying about that as well, as far as disrespect for the body, was that the mummy wrappings were cut off and given as sort of souvenirs to people who came, and
Yep.
that was a little unsettling as well. So I just want to say it's a real pleasure to have been able to read both your books and then actually get to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, you are correct. There are a lot of horrifying times, right, in Egyptology. And Arthur posted over here, Grafton Elliott Smith may have been a eugenicist, but he was an excellent anatomist. And that's the thing. The two go together, right?
Mhm.
He had to know anatomy so that he could argue that, about who should and who should not be procreating. So there is a lot of there are a lot of disturbing stories, a lot of disturbing parts of some of our, favorite Egyptologists that I think kind of, Anne, like you said, like they were humans, right? They were people in their context. And we need to understand that that is the case if we're going to more fully understand the science of Egyptology, how it was built, and then why it is the way it is today. So yeah, thank you so much for your comments. That's yeah.
I just also want to mention that there is a U of M and Ann Arbor connection in your book as well with
Hmm?
Carolyn Ransom.
You bet. Yep. She did a lot of work up there.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments for our speaker?
Well, thank you, Ellen. I saw your comment. Thank you so much. Anne?
Yeah, I just wanted to further ask. I know there's a centennial epigraphy exhibition at ISAC right now, and I know that some of the women that you deal with have connections to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted
Yeah.
to mention it.
Yeah, I could talk a little bit more about that. So, let's see, Emily Teeter just wrote it was just published a beautiful volume called Chicago on the Nile, which has to do with the century of the epigraphic survey, really starting at Medinet Habu and then sort of staying around the Luxor area and Chicago House. So yeah, Caroline Ransom Williams was on the epigraphic survey from about like 1925, 1926. And she really came in and sort of developed the process by which they were copying the temple, or sorry, the temple walls. She came in and she sort of streamlined it. She made it better. She made it more accurate. And that's why she was brought in. Harold Nelson, who was the deputy director to James Breasted at the time, he's like, I'm so excited that she's coming because I really want to learn a lot from her. So clearly, she was very well respected in the epigraphic community. And then Myrtle Broom and Amos Calverley learned their techniques to copy the temple of Seti I at Abydos from the epigraphic survey. And at one point, Caroline Ransom went to visit and just to see what they were doing and see how it was going. And Myrtle Broom wrote home to her parents. They're like, this older lady came by to check out what we were doing. She seemed really nice. She didn't mention her name. She didn't say anything like that, but she was like, yeah, I kind of liked her or whatever, and used it. And she said, hey, mom and dad, like, she was old, so you can come visit when you're old too. Like, she was trying to convince her parents to come to Abydos to visit her. So, but yeah, so those are three of the main women who are really tied to that epigraphic survey, because after Caroline Ransom left the team, there were no more women who worked on the epigraphic survey until the 1970s, because after Harold Nelson stopped being the director, everybody else after him until the 70s didn't think that there should be women in the field. So we see this sort of arc of where, we have the book starts with Amelia Edwards, and we sort of see women sort of building this field. And then after Caroline Ransom in some ways it gets cut off due to the climate or, the war. I don't really know. But yeah, there is a lot of tie to that epigraphic survey.
Right.
And then, oh, go ahead, Anne.
I guess the only thing I was going to mention is the Metropolitan Opera's new rendition that they have created of Aida.
Yep.
Features a turn of the century female archaeologist in a non-singing role. So I thought, get them to sell your book and they're at the Met gift shop.
We should, because my editor just emailed me about that yesterday. He was like, "Hey, if you can see this in the Met HD," so I'm looking for it. I'm trying to find it, but I should email him back and say, "Hey, so maybe get their publicity out there to sell it in the gift shop." That'd be amazing. I mean, I don't know what I would do. I'd obviously have to come to New York and see it in the bookshop. And then Arthur had mentioned again about the anatomists aging the skeleton in KV 55 on, the fusion of some of the bones and things. Who is at the most 22 years of age. Yeah. Yep. Thank you, everyone. This was great. This was really fun.
Yes, thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Sheppard.
Thank you.
And for your presentation, incredibly interesting. And I want to just thank everyone for your questions and comments today, and your participation. To check out further events with the Kelsey Museum, you can check out our website. Thank you so much.